Hi, welcome to Lean Blog Interviews. I'm your host, Mark Graban. Our guest today is Cheryl Jekiel. She is the founder of the Lean Leadership Center. Her team helps people-centric organizations integrate continuous improvement into their systems and culture. She's the author of a new book titled Let Go to Lead: 6 Habits for Happier, More Independent Teams with Less Stress and More Time for Yourself. So we're going to talk about that and more. Cheryl has spent the last couple of years building an innovative leadership development approach that has successfully generated leaders who are capable of coaching their teams to work independently. And Cheryl is previously author of a book that's now in its second edition titled Lean Human Resources: Redesigning HR Processes for a Culture of Continuous Improvement. So Cheryl, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
Hi, Mark. I'm excited to be here with you.
Yeah,
I like these topics. These are my favorite thing to talk about. So it'll be fun.
Of course. Yeah. Well, and you and I were both having to jog our memories. I'm surprised. You and I have talked so often, and we run into each other at places like Shingo Conference, AME Conference each year. I'm surprised. And I had to go double check that you haven't been on the podcast before. Like I thought we had talked about lean human resources, but the computer has a better memory than I do. I don't think we did.
Well, now we're here. So now we're going to our first one. Hopefully one of a few. So
well, sure. There's a lot to talk about, and congratulations again on the launch of the new book, Let Go to Lead. So before we talk about the book, I'd love to hear, people's backgrounds and lean origin stories. There are so many different starting points and pathways to this type of work. What's your lean origin story?
I think I tell it one of two ways. So the one I remember the easiest is my first car was a Ford LTD. And everything broke on this car. I remember, and I had a Ford mechanic, and I was at that age that a car repair bill of $300 or $400 is painful. How many months of whatever I'm going to have to do to pay this off? So the Ford mechanic, at one point, it was like I pulled off the handle, and he says it was made to break at about 50,000 miles. And I'm thinking, that's no good. So guess what? By the way, when I sold that car, the Ford mechanic bought it, because he was prepared to do what it took to take care of it. My second car was a Toyota, and it was a Toyota Camry, and I drove it 70,000 miles and didn't break at all.
Yeah.
So somewhere in there was this lesson that was personal to me about the benefit of making things that don't break compared to those that do.
Right.
So then I start working, and I'm at Sweetheart Cup, which is, they make straws and paper plates and that kind of thing. They've changed hands many times. They were bought by Solo, so you probably know them by that name. Yeah. I did my first lean transformation, was my first transformation, and it was the best I still think I've ever seen. It was complete overhaul, and there were many lessons from that. That's where my love of lean HR came from. And it just was this, there's lots of big lessons, but mostly defect free had never hit my radar. They completely transformed how leadership operated. So they were you had to re-interview for your role. They took a lot of people and either put them in specialized roles by technical expertise if you were a supervisor, or you made it as a coach. And so you were given more humans, but your goal was to coach humans, and then other people did more technical work. So I saw all the things that go into creating a really different place. And most of the stories I have that still really touch my heart, there's one on a forklift driver I often talk about. And Pete was somebody I had seen driving a forklift. We'd gotten to know each other. And there was all these interdepartmental problem solving teams. I think it was called Total Quality at the time. But what I still saw was people who I had seen pack cups or do the same thing every day, all day, not talking to almost anybody, all of a sudden being in teams and solving problems. And we had some big wins from that. And but this particular gentleman, I just recall him coming into one of our meetings, and he became the facilitator. So it certainly showed me, this creates whole life adventures for people they wouldn't have any otherwise. So I think what took me was really the quality of life issue. It's
Yeah.
really all about seeing people come alive and unleash those skills and talents that would lie dormant otherwise.
Yeah. Not just the quality of the product, but hand in hand with the quality of the work experience. And I mean, General Motors, gosh, and I dating myself here. I mean, it's 30 years ago this summer that I started at General Motors. And long before that, I mean, probably going back a decade beforehand, the automotive industry and GM and with the UAW had programs that they really focused on quality of work life. QOWL is kind of a precursor, but compatible with that should be one of the primary goals, I would say. Not just safety, but just a better workplace environment. I'm happy to hear that the company at that time was focused on that, right? Because a lot of companies at that time might have just been doing various lean tools, limited lean tools, Kaizen events,
They
maybe.
literally turned the place on its side. They had a lot to gain and a lot to lose by getting it right, and so they made a huge overhaul. That was one of those no sacred cows. There was all,
Yeah.
whatever it took, they were going to do it. And so it's shown me since then. A lot of times, people say or companies say they want this, but they're not really willing to do that really hard. That really, but that's what it takes a lot of times. Is the really hard.
Well, and that's still sadly true today. What they say they want versus what they're willing to work through. Now, were you? Did you start your career in HR? Did you end up working in and writing about HR? As did your career evolve into that?
Well, my family, I worked for my father until I was somewhere in my mid-20s. And I told him it was a finance business, like financial planning. And I had already, by then worked in investments and insurance. And when I said I wanted to go leave and be in HR, he was like, I wanted to join the circus or something. You want to go where and do what? I want to be in HR. So my first job was the first thing I could get in the field of HR without starting from a college grad point of view. And I did that for a lot of different years. But going back to that Sweetheart, I remember, here's one of the big stories. I worked in a corporate HR department, and I come in from learning these concepts about adding value and what doesn't add value. And the person next to me was a file clerk. And it was Wednesday of the week of my first training. And I say, that stuff you file, is there other copies of that anywhere? And they're like, yep. And then I'm like, how often do you go in these files to go track this stuff down? She's like, hardly ever. And so we had her literally reassigned to something more value added.
Yeah.
It just was, people can spend their whole lives doing things that just don't need to be done. And then compared to adding value.
Right. Yeah. And I've heard, and it's, in a different context, in a previous guest on this podcast, Eric Reese, who wrote books including The Lean Startup. He was thinking about software developers, and I think this applies more broadly. He states it in basically, don't waste people's lives working on things that aren't benefiting anybody. That's not a bad goal.
Yep.
So at Sweetheart, I mean, what do you recall was the impetus for making such a transformation? Yeah.
Oh, they were making a lot of product that didn't need to be made. So at the point they called time and started this whole thing, we had warehouses filled with product that hadn't sold. So they were an inventory problem. There was a consulting firm that had come in and done a report card and said, you were just wasting a ton of money. And then there's the errors. What I grew to understand also, as we've got in this field, when we would have a customer error, it'd be a big one. So we did the containers for Ben and Jerry's. We made a mistake on the printing and had a truckload of pistachio ice cream with can't go anywhere because the container's wrong.
Yeah.
But what I saw was we made some issues with Wendy's straws. At the time, this is a long, long time ago. But again, what I remember was the difference. It was a team to team. It shifted things from a sales department service issue, you got to apologize and just tell them it won't ever happen again.
Right.
To root cause analysis, team root cause analysis. And I saw the power of that and what it created both sales wise, but it just made more sense to me. I think people don't appreciate the sales value of continuous improvement more than just the we can make it more efficiently or take out wasted. I think clients and customers love this stuff.
Well, you can think about, the sales benefit of quality, on-time delivery.
And that
And
the team's engaged. You've
yeah,
got a workforce that's like in here with it instead of, oops, somebody made a mistake. I wonder if they care. It's like, yeah, they care. They're all in here. They're all making it better. It's a
yeah,
team sport.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it sounds like you had some good influences early on, and I was going to ask, like maybe that consulting firm that left that report wasn't the one that helped them with lean, like were there outside consultants?
Around, they did a lot of that.
Okay.
There was a firm called the Chicago Workforce. They don't exist anymore, but they
Yeah.
did. They were the ones that really kind of came in with how work needed to change, how roles needed to change,
Hmm.
how really re-understanding what supervisor work is and what coaching's about. And if you were going to have people in these teams, then what would have to change in the whole environment? And I've often thought since then, a lot of these might do well to have had that extra support just on the work itself and how the roles change and all that stuff. And so that was my first introduction. And again, it was great stuff.
Yeah.
So it's no wonder I grew to love it really fast. But
Yeah. Well, and so now, tell us more about the Lean Leadership Center and how that came to be, and some of the work that you've done in recent years.
Well, the HR stuff was really it would break my heart to continue to see people struggle with how HR can add value, maybe compared at times it wasn't adding value. For many reasons. Again, I had an HR background, so people would sometimes, well, we don't need them for anything, or they wouldn't know how to add value. And what I kept saying, for a lot of HR folks, they want to add more value, but there's also more working against them than sometimes people realize.
Mm-hmm.
So I always say it's like two ships passing in the night. So it's a matter of resolving it from both ends, ask more of it, and then make sure they're prepared to step up into it. So that has been an ongoing passion of mine. I mean, to this day, I run communities of HR folks in both Shingo. I'm starting one in AME for them just to connect to each other. I always say the best people for HR to talk to are each other about what their practices are and what this means to them. So that was just, I remember feeling like if I don't devote my career to this, then I don't know who was going to.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I came motivated to be partly the spokesman, or at least one of the people in the field making space for HR to be seen.
So did you start the Lean Leadership Center then to do that work specifically, or with something broader focus?
I mean, I wrote the book almost 10 years before I became self-employed. My business started in 2015, and it's been an odyssey of learning. And if I would have never guessed then that it would turn into what it turned into. So Let Go to Lead represents the lessons I learned from the time that it was released about a year ago, over the last 5 years before then. So it was 5 years worth of learning. I had been doing some work for the state of Illinois. And that was one of the first things I actually did when I came out on my own. I worked with the state of Illinois. Someone gave me a chance. And they were putting in supervisory training, but it was not good training. And it hadn't been released, but they were building it. And there was just loads of PowerPoint decks and lots of bullet points. Slides upon slide, with lots of bullet points. And when I asked them what they wanted to accomplish, they said, well, people will know what they don't know. First, I think the question caught them off guard.
Yeah.
So that was the best they could give me. So I started on this path of redesigning basic leadership training to creating a conducive environment for basically continuous improvement.
Yeah.
It was basic training. I mean, it was the basics of how do you lead people. It was like, how would we be doing this cool coaching stuff and still have first line supervisory training of a traditional workforce being done to train supervisors?
Right.
So I reconfigured it, and that's all I've done since then, pretty much. I mean, I do a few other things, but a lot of my time and energy, and Let Go to Lead is just the lessons I learned, like what it taught me. It taught me a lot of things, but
yeah. Yeah. So you talked about your first exposure to lean and changing the way leaders operated. And then as you've done more work with other organizations, are those habits and kind of new ways of operating, is that the core of Let Go to Lead, or does the book build upon what we might recognize, what the audience might recognize as quote unquote lean leadership behavior, such as don't blame individuals for systemic quality problems? I think is one that you've brought up already.
Right. Some things I would say I don't think people would guess, and I know them to be true from observation. Like it taught me and the people doing the work. An example of that, one of the habits is to be clear. And I have over and over again seen this tremendous almost disconnect between people thinking they've said something or are clear with people and then realizing, oh, I'm not clear.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you said, an example would be, I want my team to be more proactive. Well, if they were more proactive, what would you see them doing? And then
Right.
this pause. So I've realized people tend to think conceptually and not speak in a way that the other people will know, like, what do you want me to do?
Mm-hmm.
Having like be more specific and more clear. So that's a huge disconnect that's in play every day, all day.
Yeah.
People's vision just isn't crystal clear, and they
Yeah.
need to learn to communicate it. So that's a big, I wouldn't have guessed clarity.
Mm-hmm.
Clarity of your vision, clarity of how your team will need to, what they deliver for that vision. There's just a lot of things not nailed down, and that's
Mm-hmm.
where it's all lost in. It's literally in a lack of clarity.
Yeah. Well, it seems like a lot of lean coaching or talk about lean leadership runs the risk of falling into cliches that maybe aren't really clear. Like, we want you to be more customer focused. Well, okay, what does that translate to on a daily basis? Things like that.
Right. And so then if you say to the leader, what would that mean? And they pause. Usually it takes a pause, or they're working with the team and they'll be like, so what does that mean? And that would mean like, well, if they have emails that came in that day, they're responding to everybody. Or if they can't get something back to someone, they tell. So they start listing these customer service behaviors. And I'm like, so if you talk to your team like that compared to be customer focused, which would likely drive more of the right behaviors? They're like,
Mm-hmm.
the much more detailed, specific one to tell me what this means from a behavior. And so again, that's not like that's a secret. I just never had any idea how much stuff was stuck there.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot stuck, like choice of word, to your point. They start to understand words like proactive or a sense of urgency or responsible. That means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So you can keep saying it. They don't know what you mean, so they don't do what you think they would be doing because they don't know what you mean.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
the more clear we are, the more we set everyone up for success. So
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
was a surprise.
Yeah. And I'm going back, having flashbacks to my first year at General Motors, where leaders would yell and blame people, and some of the lack of clarity. I mean, like these almost daily cliches of like leaders yelling that we need a greater sense of urgency and we need to work with more intensity. Like, are those the same thing? Are those different? Am I being intense, or am I being urgent, or like should I be running from place to place? Like, it was just kind of empty, unclear, not lean leadership to begin with.
I love that you take ownership. I want people to take ownership. You'll ask 10 leaders, what does that mean? And you will not hit the same 10 answers. They will have their own interpretation of what taking ownership really means. And then they think it's the clearest thing ever. It's not.
Yeah. People need to be held accountable for performance. What does that mean?
Yeah, so that's what I'm talking about, clarity. And this is where people, they don't realize that's not clear. They think they've been clear, and then they realize, well, they start to understand there's been things in my head that I'm not saying.
Right.
Or I don't think through what I mean. And when I think it through and I express that well, lots more likely to happen.
Well, and I think maybe in an environment where there's a low degree of psychological safety, people don't feel safe to ask the follow-up question. What does that mean when the leader gives some sort of directive, impassioned, or otherwise. Like, we should be able to ask. I mean, I would think a leader maybe is that one way of making sure you're clear, is either trying to test for understanding, or have an environment where people feel safe to say, hey, give me an example of what you mean.
Well, one of the things we teach all the time that people say they often remember is say it, write it, and confirm it.
Mm-hmm.
But when it matters, and so your intention was to express an expectation, you need to, people don't remember things you say. So they'll be like, I said that in the last staff meeting.
Right.
And when you're at the other, how to write clearly. So again, write things in a way people know exactly what you mean. And then the most important, I shouldn't say most, as important, is ask people what they understand.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the piece that people are like, oh, that's not something I ever thought to do. So they'll be like, I'm not doing what I want them to do. And I'm like, you want to ask them what they think the expectation is, and you will find out lots of times there's a complete disconnect between what you think they understood and what they do understand. And then they're like, again, it's so easy to clean that up. Like, let's just go back through this. What happened? So
yeah. What are some of the other key habits, whether it's more generally about lean leadership, or one of the 6 habits that you've decided is so important as described in the book?
This one is not so much, so the book has these habits and then it talks about how to sustain them. But this one I'm seeing is literally, it's partly the habit. I think it's the need for community support, and people regularly making it to habit that they reach out for support. I realized, I spent a lot of years, to your point, we've both been at this well, and we've kept seeing people struggle to become coaches, including myself. We knew that we would want to be an empowering leader, and we knew we should be asking more questions. But then I started having conversations with people I looked up to as like, this person's got it. And they're like, I'm not asking enough questions. I tend to tell people what to do. So this thing started to go in my brain, like, what's the answer to that? And what I discovered, again, I happened across it. I didn't know this was the answer, but what I've seen partly helps that. Is, have you ever heard the idea that people with a shared problem do better together, right? So we've all kind of heard that, right? So when they create communities and they're all working on their leadership skills and trying to be less directive, and because letting go is uncomfortable. So I think, one, we treat coaching as if you knew how to ask questions, you would ask questions. And I'm like, no, because you're likely to be really uncomfortable. People don't naturally lean into discomfort. So that need to control is normal and natural. But when leaders share that struggle, I've seen that that's what moves the dial. I've seen it before my very eyes over and over again. Now, that doesn't come from me. It actually, I've studied since then. I found out why that works. It just has to do with social support around building new skills. So it's like really making sure we don't expect people to build those skills by themselves. Like, just between you and you know that you don't ask enough questions, or you can empower people more.
Yeah.
I think it's creating those communities and leadership teams to talk about it.
So that community of support is within the company, or sometimes outside the company through, say, professional associations or networking groups?
What I'm speaking to, I don't mean that it is. What I'm speaking to is the way any organization could create time and space for leaders to connect on their leadership. The thing about this topic is they can be friends. They can play softball and talk about their kids' weddings. They don't generally show up at lunch and talk about how they're leading or not leading effectively. It's just not something people talk about. Like, that's their private, I'm not going to tell anybody I'm stuck. So it's creating that avenue to dialogue about those things and the normalcy that's okay to share. I think these are like 1-hour stints of time people connect in pairs or triads and just talk to each other. From there, mostly from a facilitation, is back off and leave them alone. They don't need a lot of help. The magic of this is part of our nature to connect with other humans. And from feeling more normal or more understood, we gain strength to try and not get discouraged. And I'm not the only one. So mostly, I think organizations should mostly, I think this needs to be like a habit in organizations, an organizational habit to
Right.
create community.
Yeah. And that kind of discussion in those communities, requires, a lot of people would use the word vulnerability, which might be a word people aren't comfortable with, yet alone the act of being vulnerable. And, the thing of vulnerability is sharing something that might damage your reputation. Like in a lot of organizations, sharing the idea that, hey, I'm struggling with this situation, instead of bringing help, it might bring, a raised eyebrow or, criticism, or, to admit that we don't know something or that we're struggling. How would you kind of try to get the ball rolling? Does it start with, let's say, if a senior leader is willing to lead the way in being vulnerable?
I haven't seen, I mean, it might be true, but I haven't seen that. What I've really seen is it's giving them the right discussion questions, but this is not that complicated. It's what they're talking about. They're in small enough groups that they're not likely to feel as uncomfortable from that. But for instance, whenever they're in pairs or triads, I go around the building and find all available space. And then I have them go to private areas.
Mm-hmm.
An office that nobody's in or a conference room that's empty. You find space. And when those twos or threes are alone, the natural, if the discussion's bringing it up and they just feel private enough, and obviously we also talk about being confidential and not to be repeated. From there, I really haven't seen any issue in any culture where it doesn't start to just come out, and they start finding, what they're shocked to find out is the other two in the group are equally as challenged. They think they're
Right.
the ones that aren't performing well and everyone else feels fine. And as soon as they find out that nobody seems to feel completely on track, then they start feeling like, oh, I'm not alone, and I don't need to be embarrassed or hide this thing because we've all got it. And it has truly stunned me with how much people don't know that.
Right.
They really don't. They come back and they're like, we all have the same problems.
Yeah. Or that just the admission that it's okay to not be perfect. That's maybe one of the other things to let go of, or it's challenging to let go of the control, or try to let go of the habit of creating the perception that I am all knowing and perfect as a leader. Right.
Yeah. One of the other issues we talk about is beyond change what feels good to you. Because one of the, again, common issue going on is people feel good as a leader from feeling needed, feeling like you're coming to me, I'm removing barriers. How many times do we say leaders remove the barriers? And so that's where they get their sense of good feelings and self-worth and value.
Yeah.
If you're going to change that to developing others and empowering others and letting go and getting out of the way and being less visible, we're going to need to shift the dialogue around what it means to lead and what feels good about that. And those have good feelings. They're just different good feelings.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, would you agree, or what are your thoughts on the idea of finding balance, where I think we would be in rabid agreement that leaders can't solve everything, that transformation doesn't come from escalating, every problem to leaders at different levels. We want to be engaging in empowering people at the front line. But there are some problems, I would say, that are like really systemic in nature, or involve policies, or, strategic issues where leaders can still be removing barriers, but maybe, it's a matter of finding the right barriers to get involved in.
Yeah, it's been interesting. The last year of my life has been spent on one general topic, which is the balance between non-role-based leadership, meaning optimizing what each individual can contribute in any number of environments or ways, against hierarchical. And instead of it being this or that, it's this and that.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm definitely not making the case, but here's what I do think is that we still way underdo non-role-based leadership. Our sense of hierarchy is so strong and so pronounced and so pervasive that it just overrules a lot of places. It just dominates.
Mm-hmm.
So I've become a fan of, so I'm getting my doctorate now, as you're probably aware, and my dissertation is on this topic.
Yeah.
So I find myself endlessly curious about how to better understand basically the pros and cons of hierarchy. It's
Mm-hmm.
not whether it ever adds any value. It's like, I think it is a thing that definitely adds value, but how do you understand where it's going to come back to bite you, so to speak? Where does
Yeah.
it interfere with things you don't want it to interfere with?
Right.
And then what to do about that.
Yeah, and I've heard language, and I think this comes from Toyota people. The difference between limiting bureaucracy and enabling bureaucracy. That the goal would be enabling bureaucracy instead of bureaucracy that tells you all the things you cannot do. Bureaucracy that helps you do more.
Yeah, because this goes back to our other part of the conversation about these words. I keep finding out, go into environments like, what do you want to see? If this continuous improvement meets your expectations, what do you see? And they'll be like, empowered people. I want an empowering workplace. I want
Well,
engagement. I'm like, what does that mean? And then they're
yeah,
because I realize lean leadership by its definition really is leaders who empower others almost by definition. Empower them to do what? We've spent so much time figuring out how it differs from just traditional leadership, like top-down directive. We hadn't really been working on, if you empower them, what are all the things you're empowering? What does that take? What does that look like? How does it need to be structured? So I'm all for that. I just think it needs more meat on the bones, more understanding what it means.
Yeah. So one thing that's becoming really clear to me is that I think you and I both ask that question a lot. Well, what specifically do you mean by that? And sometimes people find that helpful, and gosh, I'm sure there's times where it's annoying, where someone gets mad about like, well, I was already being clear. But back to your your earlier point, I think as a speaker or as a writer, like we shouldn't blame the audience for not understanding what we thought we were being clear about.
Yeah, I think the thing, like questions like when you say be proactive, I think the person does know what they mean. If they just pause and reflect, then they do have an idea. I think things like empowerment, or these are bigger concepts, how to involve everyone in continuous improvement. That's not new, right? We've been talking about
Right.
that for 20, 30 years, except most organizations aren't doing it, right?
Right.
They
Sadly.
mean to talk out of both sides of their mouth. It's literally an entire set of skills, structures, dynamics they don't know how to do. You don't know how to do what you don't know how to do.
Yeah.
So I don't think they're by any means insincere or don't mean to do it. I think what we need to be focused on is more pathways to make that more obvious. I think we have not talked as a lean community. If we as a total have clarity about how we structure empowerment, what does that look like? What does it need?
Yeah.
All that.
Well, and these different directives come into conflict with each other if there's not good alignment around, I think, a wide range of principles or mindsets. So, to your point, I can figure out what be proactive means. But if I was working in that, let's call it the bad General Motors environment 30 years ago under traditional leaders, they might have said, okay, well, that sense of urgency means being proactive and not waiting to be told what to do. So let's say, I'm making up a scenario, but I'm like, let's say I was being proactive and I'm like, well, I know there's a safety risk where one of the operators could get hurt, so I shut down production proactively to let maintenance come over, and like I might have gotten yelled at for shutting the line down because the boundaries of what I would have been allowed to be proactive about might not have made me feel very empowered or aligned with the other mindset. So like, yeah, we might be proactive, but you can't stop the line. I'm like, well, okay. And now you're going to hold me accountable for safety and productivity. Like you're not letting me do the things, that kind of environment causes a lot of frustration, of course.
Again, from watching it, I think what I'm looking at from that dynamic, I've been studying again also, we have mental models, so to speak. We have this underlying tape that runs in our head. And so we can be thinking we want a continuous improvement environment. So when I'm saying to you, I want you to, step up and be proactive, The other part of me that has been getting a very strong message of short-term results, and I want the number today, this week. How are you doing it? The environment hasn't gotten clear that messaging interferes with the other. It's like it's all under the surface. And I think a lot of this stuff takes more reflection to figure out if that's what you want, what other operating systems or inside operating systems are running in a different direction, and what can we do about it? I think that this is transformation requires more internal rewiring than we talk about sometimes.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, leaders might say they want people to be proactive and empowered and customer focused and quality focused. And we're going to focus on respect for people. But then leaders, part of their mental model is, I've heard people articulate this fairly directly, is, if an employee disagrees, how dare you disagree with me? That's being disrespectful. Like, well, that's not how I would define respect or disrespect. But that different mindset or mental model then surprises somebody and pops up and like, oh, their mental model is you can't ever disagree with me.
We're not going to. That's uncomfortable. Remember, I said a lot of this would be uncomfortable. Maybe what you disagree with is how to do something. It doesn't mean we're having a personality conflict. It means I think we should do it this way, and you think we should do it that way, and I'm used to my way rules.
Yeah.
If I've empowered a team, I need to be potentially overriding my opinion with your opinion. And that's just plain uncomfortable until it's not. But it is probably much more uncomfortable than it's not. I keep saying to leaders, by the time you're actually uncomfortable, you're probably getting it. You're probably right where you're supposed to be by the time you're actually very uncomfortable.
Yeah. So how do you help leaders lean into the discomfort? Instead of backing off?
Community. So one, as I said, I really believe it's creating accountability groups or buddy groups or different ways people are connecting with other people in a way, to your point, that's vulnerable enough and regular enough to make a difference. Second, I've come to be a big fan of practice. I think we think of leadership development like something that's accomplished. Like I went to the training and now I have the skills and now I'm done. Like I have all that stuff.
Yeah.
And I think these are, I've said to people, if you look at any sport, and no matter how famous the athlete, they still practice basics. They just you don't get done with how you bat or how you catch or how all of that takes practice. And I think leadership is really the same thing. I think there's this need to keep practicing those things and keep getting better at them, how we talk to people, how we coach, how we let go. Whereas I just don't think we're thinking of these things as, you and I both know when it comes to coaching right now, right? If you go in the world of coaching certification and coaching training, it's predominantly practice. It's a little bit of concept and a lot of hours spent doing it.
That's good.
And yet most leadership development program doesn't look like that. It looks like you went through the class and you practiced twice. You practiced.
Yeah. A lot of lean development or training follows that similar kind of model. And I think the practice, the learn by doing, that's not a new concept. I've gone back to, learning, TQM 27 years ago, in grad school. And then the thing that kept reinforcing was, learn, do, it's like completely intertwined. Now, ironically, they were teaching us that in a classroom setting, which was a lot of learn, but they were encouraging us out in an organization that there should be this intertwined learn and do, never ending, and not just practicing, but having a coach. Pro athletes, individuals, golfers, tennis players, very individual activities, have coaches, even players that play a team sport have individual coaches that work with them on, their shooting form if they're a basketball player. And
more support. That's just another form of support. So people can get clear, what am I doing well? What am I not doing well? How do I talk to someone about where I'm stuck on whatever this topic is, come up with some action plans, how to come at it. All that good stuff that would come out of all that.
Yeah. Yeah. And then there's even the level of, and maybe we can transition a little bit to one of the things you write about in the book. One of the ways to sustain things, or I would argue even one of the ways to get things started is more on the mental side of things. Athletes have, there are sports psychologists that work with players and work with teams to great effect. People might not like that idea in a workplace, but there are practices that come out of psychology, clinical settings, and in particular, a methodology called motivational interviewing. So tell me, why that's important to you, and why you wrote about that, because that's a topic we've talked about on this podcast with different guests. There's one episode with the authors of a book called "Am I Lead?" Motivational interviewing for leaders. So workplace applications.
I got
you
that.
have
Yeah. William Harvey recommended I take it, and then I gave it to someone, and now I have to go get one back for me because I've already given it to somebody.
Yeah.
And so I'm definitely very interested in this topic and would love to see continued conversation about it. So I came into it through the work of Ron Oslin and Larry Anderson and Tony Chamberlain, who were Toyota folks who had worked for Toyota, and they came across it from the addictions medicine field.
Mm-hmm.
And so I remember them saying that we had found this thing that's used in mental health and it can be applied to business. Because I was an addictions counselor when I was about 25. Long time ago. So all of a sudden I was like, oh, well, that makes sense that people change, because one of the endless things we always were talking about, people make those changes when they're ready.
Yeah.
Other people don't make people ready, and you can talk at them, but that usually makes it worse, not better. And so that just made sense to me. And that so I think it's the stages of change. So if people are listening to this and they're like, I don't know what the stages of change are, I think, first of all, that's the most start there. And then motivational interviewing is this idea of asking certain kinds of questions and a lot of reflective listening. But underneath it, the principles are kind of a sacred respect to honor where people are at.
Yeah.
Instead of it's inconveniencing me or I'm irritated, like my judgments about it are on me, and they are not so conducive to people progressing.
Yeah.
And then I remember Ron said to me once, and even if you're just talking about the football game, they're progressing because you're building rapport.
Right.
You're making a connection instead of like, you're not on board and so I'm done talking to you. Like you're just, and I always say to people, it wouldn't have made sense that large groups of people would just get up in the morning and all be ready to change this morning.
Yeah.
Because the lean folks came and said, we have tools and we have ways to change. And
right.
It never made sense to me anyway, but it helped me see the path to.
Yeah. Yeah. Because, part of that, that mindset or foundation of motivational interviewing is about being helpful to the other person. So the one thing I think about, from reading or training, and, if you're in the role of a coach or role of a leader, do you want to be right or do you want to be helpful? Because sometimes being right and telling, even if you're telling them the correct thing to do, or even in telling why lean is important or why they should change or why they should stop gambling, like that's just, you're being right, but you're not being helpful, because there is to me, respect for people means respecting this human nature of, if you tell me to do something, I am absolutely going to have like an equal and opposite reaction. You need to do that. No, I don't. That's part of being human. And so instead of telling people to get in line and to stop reacting in a human way, we need to understand how humans react and do less telling if you want to be helpful.
Yeah, I just haven't seen us talking about that the way we could. Even in the larger lean community. I've been the person I gave that book to, continuous improvement in a corporate environment, and going into, facility by facility, carrying the corporate banner of what we're going to be doing. And first coming in on a mission and then running into buzzsaw after buzzsaw. And so then shifting that to like, first I need to honor where you are. I need to meet people where they're at instead of coming at you like, and then he was starting to see like, I'm trying to tell them why this is better than what they're doing. And like, they don't want to hear it. I'm like, because what that makes them is kind of wrong.
Right. And that's not helpful.
Superior way. And you need to know that I have a superior way of doing this thing than you do it. And I'm like, I don't, and they don't know you yet. Again,
Mm-hmm.
the relationship account is brand new. So most people aren't going to start there. And so when I've been talking to them about how if people weren't thinking about making a change, pre-contemplation and the stages of change, they're not welcoming a conversation to figure out how to do it differently. It's not what they're thinking about. We need to be more aware, like until you brought this up, they weren't even considering this change.
Right. Yeah. And I think there are parallels to good, structured problem solving approaches of stop jumping to solutions, stop pushing countermeasures. Do we even agree yet that there's a problem and that there's a future state that's better than the current state? And do we think that change is even possible?
Right.
Right.
But again, team members having more patience with each other, realizing we're not going to land on this topic the same way. Some of us are ready to come in the morning and scrap what we were doing and start something else. And some of us are like, heck no, I'm not doing that.
Yeah.
And just realizing that's normal. That's not people being resistant or difficult or, we just have spent a lot of times talking about this behavior as if it's the problem. That's the problem. It's this resistance.
Yeah.
These resistors, I'm like, they're just where they are.
That's part of being human. And again, I think that's an unhelpful mindset or habit to blame the people who are being resistant to change instead of going in and having that conversation and laying the groundwork with the relationships and it makes me think of the another lean cliche, and we could ask, what do you mean by this? Go slow to go fast. Like, for anyone that says we don't have time to build those relationships, I think of like the second plant manager I had at GM 29 years ago, the good one, the GM guy that was NUMMI trained. I was being young and impatient. And, I remember I've told this story on the podcast before, I think, but it's a short story of asking Larry. He was out in the Gemba talking, really listening to, the frontline UAW employees. And he was out there a lot, which was a visible difference from the old plant manager. And I asked Larry one-on-one, I think after his conversation with that employee was done. And, I said basically, well, I you're new here. And I'm excited you're here. And we're going to do all these lean things now. And kind of like, when are we, okay, when are we going to get to it? And, he basically explained to me, and I think this is a fact-based statement. I know what needs to be done here. The team doesn't yet know that I know. And he was building relationships, and he didn't trot out the phrase, I'm going slow to go fast, but I think that's what he was doing. He was laying the groundwork for when we did start ramping up lean practices and trying to shift mindsets. I think we're able to go faster with that foundation.
Yeah, and also, one of the things I just even saw it last week is we don't always think about the fact that maybe ourselves or a team of leaders or other people have been at this for sometimes multiple years. Our time to get our head around the change and how we're going to change and what it involves. And then when we meet someone who hasn't thought about it at all, wondering why they're not faster, when some of this just plain takes time. People don't go from, I'm not thinking about it till I think I'll change how I work in the morning.
Yeah.
I've spent my whole career doing this. Of course, it's natural to me to talk about it. It's all I've ever talked about since I'm 25 years old.
Right.
So to us, it's nothing new.
Yeah. And meeting people where they are. If we have a team, it's not even about meeting the team where collectively they are. It's where each individual is in that process of change, right?
Mm-hmm. My first change management booklet was basically saying people change one person at a time. Mm-hmm. A completely individualized thing. And to this day, that is the bottom line of this is they change individually. So we come into a plant with 1,000 people and 150 leaders and say, we got a program. We got a plan. We have an initiative. We're going to make things happen. I'm like, you got a lot of individuals. And so you got to really think about the fact these are 1,000 human beings that you've got to deal with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, again, our guest today has been Cheryl Jekiel from the Lean Leadership Center. The new book is Let Go to Lead: 6 Habits for Happier, More Independent Teams, in parentheses, with less stress and more time for yourself. And I'll make sure there's links to all of that in the show notes. Is this is the obnoxiously open-ended question to wrap up with? I sometimes freeze up when it gets thrown at me, but I'm going to ask anyway. Is there anything else that you'd like to share, with the audience? Anything else I should have asked you about your book and your work?
But since what you should have asked me, I felt like when you read the name of the title of the book, I'm like, you might be like, I don't get this whole like less stress and more time for yourself. Like, what does that have to do with leadership?
That could be a whole discussion,
Yeah,
a
right.
whole hour on that.
The bottom line of it is, it links back to when I was doing this initial work. And a lot of people, they were discussing the stress. But as we started to make these more independent teams, I remember one of the leaders came in, and I liked her very much. And she worked out of Southern Illinois. And she came into the room and she says, I'm starting to leave earlier, and I'm going to my kids' baseball games, and I haven't been able to do that. So I started to realize, well, we've talked about the hard things. The good news is when people do lean into this, one benefit is they're not carrying all the problems, and so they're not carrying all the stress, and then they have choices to make with what to do with that energy, whether to put it into their work or put it into my home, put it into self-care. So that's the good news. And I don't think we talk about that enough.
Yeah.
Not an immediate payoff, but it's not that far down the road.
Mm. And I've seen that happen in my own work and my own experience, leaders having those epiphanies of when they let go, to use the phrase from your book, when they let go of the need to be the problem solver and the one fixing everything, and they start distributing that effort, more is happening and they're going home sooner. More improvement, less effort on their own. And there's another mindset. I know we're trying to wrap things up, but I think of the mindset of, I feel leaders might feel less worthy as a leader if they're not fixing it all themselves, or that they're, I'm going to be viewed as a bad leader because I didn't fix it. I'm like, no, I think you're going to get credit for everything that happens in your organization, whether you individually did it or not. That's called leadership.
Say my team's going to present their solution instead of I'm here to present the solution. Looks plenty good.
I think that's only a positive reflection on a leader, but I get surprised by people's mental models sometimes.
I know. I hear you.
Well, all right. So, Cheryl, there's so many different follow-up conversations we could have, but thank you for doing this one here today, and I hope people will reach out and connect and find you through your website and LinkedIn and through the book. Available for a little while now, but we'll say available now.
It was really good to talk with you, Mark.
Likewise.
I don't know why it took us so long, but that was really fun.
Okay, well, good. Well, then it sounds like we'll do it again.
All right. Thanks, Mark.
Bye.